So welcome to the Spartan Nurse Podcast. We're your hosts, Dr. Mike Martel.
And Dr. Krista Reaves.
Today we're sitting down with Pia Love. Pia, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, Mike, I can. I consider myself a nurse of all trades. I have done some of everything in nursing. I'm cross-trained in 4 different specialties in nursing. So at any given moment, I could go from an ICU to a psych unit and be very proficient. I've been a nurse entrepreneur. I consider myself a serial nurse entrepreneur because I've had 2 successful businesses. I've been an assistant director of nursing several times in a nursing home. I filed complaints with the Board of Nursing saying they need to get their nursing act together. I'm just a nurse of all trade. I've went to a master's program at Tennessee State University, and then to kind of supplement that, I got a master's in mental health counseling from Walden University. So I'm the nurse that does it, you know, and it is immeasurable.
All the things.
Yes.
All the things. But I love that, though, because that's the beauty of nursing is you can do something for 2 or 3 years and change it up and do something else and learn and grow in that specialty field. But tell me a little bit more about what made you kind of focus and hone in on behavioral health nursing.
Okay, sure. It started when my mom passed. I had what I would say was impaired grieving. Like I went from a high-functioning, highly energetic person to sleeping days and days on end, not moving off of the couch, just being unbelievably tearful. I didn't want to work. I didn't want to comb my hair for like an entire year.
Wow.
And so for like a 3-year period, I went to various mental health professionals trying to figure out like what's wrong with me. I tried therapy. I tried EMDR. I tried all these different things, but I was just grieving the loss of my mother. And I saw how profound of an effect what was going on in my mind had on my life, and it was so bizarre to me. And here's the kicker. My dad's a psych nurse. He's been a psych nurse for about 20 years, but it wasn't until my mom passed that I started to ask him more about like, okay, what can nurses do? What can I do? How can I take care of myself? And so through that like inquisitive phase about trying to figure out what was wrong with me, I discovered the world of mental health, no lie. And it was just like a natural shift for me. I just fit in well with the patients, caught on to the patient regimen, and then the whole world of mental health just kind of opened up to me. And I'm like, yes, I'm doing this.
This is where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like I'm a natural at behavioral health.
Wow.
And that passion was driven by such a personal experience.
It was. It was definitely personal because I was Superwoman up until then. You know, there was nothing I couldn't do, but it was so crippling to deal with like the death of a parent. I didn't really know like how to exist, if that, you know, sounds right. And so through all the different changes and different mood swings, I'm like, something's going on in my head. This is not just physical.
Right.
I'm feeling something mentally, and that just sparked a flame, and here I am.
Yeah. That's great that you were able to, you know, develop that as your passion, especially, you know, going through something like that, you know, and then being able to develop that passion from that is awesome.
Thank you, Mike.
You mentioned entrepreneurial efforts. So describe some of your entrepreneurial efforts in mental health.
Okay, I'll tell you about the latest. From 2019 to 2023, I created a small business called PM Education Services. It was a 3-tiered business. The first leg was just to disseminate mental health knowledge during the pandemic because I was in Detroit during the pandemic, and that was considered an epicenter. And there were people with lots of anxiety, lots of paranoia. And that was the first time I'd really seen people just out in the open expressing how anxious they felt, how, you know, mistrustful they were of like healthcare leaders and the governor even, you know. And I'm like, oh, man, there's a need for business, right? So I started that, and that was the first leg of the company. The second leg, I did consulting. And then the third leg, which was the most, I'd say, impactful leg of the business, was I set up an online virtual, I called it a waiting room, but it was really DoxyMe software, where people who were having like mental health crises and needed someone to talk to could reach me 24/7. But that turned into a whole lot of people from across this country calling and needing someone to talk to.
So you weren't getting any sleep.
No, absolutely not. I mean, my Facebook Messenger was going off, my phone, I went through like 3 phones. And it turned into me and a social worker friend of mine, and then me and a therapist friend of mine, we started referring these people to therapists or community organizations, and it really became a thing. I ended up being nominated for a Detroit Choice Award because the business was so impactful. Yeah, I reached, I think by its end, about 20,000 people. We had like 20,000 inquiries, 20,000 clients. It was unbelievable.
That's awesome. You know, and I like that you talked about entrepreneurship with nursing, because a lot of times I think we don't talk about that enough. There's opportunities that exist out there, not only to address needs in our community, but also as nurses to become entrepreneurs. I've seen a lot of things nationally about that too, about nurses getting into more of that entrepreneurial things, because, you know, a lot of corporations are putting things into place, and why can't nurses be at the forefront of that? And leading those things and leading those changes and creating corporations that are doing those things and also making a tremendous impact at the same time. I think that's excellent. So
being an entrepreneur is very hard. It's different from just going to work on the floor and your work is set up for you and everybody expects for you to be there 12 hours and it's over. Entrepreneurship is a lot about failure, a lot about confidence. I think that entrepreneurship is the wave of the future for nursing, because we have a skill set that can be broken into so many different small business avenues and lanes. I met a guy in Texas. He does consulting. He's a nurse consultant, and he took a 6-week certification course, and he goes into hospitals and he recommends things so that the nurses can have more of a voice, how to, you know, get more nursing impact. He makes $1 million a year. Yeah, unbelievable. I'm like, goals. I got goals.
Absolutely.
I got dreams.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I think that's the wave of the future for nurses.
I love that. That's awesome. And, you know, and you talked a little bit too initially about failure, and sometimes failure happens when you're developing that entrepreneurship. I listened to audiobooks, and it was Failing Forward by John Maxwell, and it was talking about all the corporations where people have developed very successful corporations that initially failed multiple times and then eventually succeeded. And so, and we always even tell our students that, you know, one failed exam doesn't define them as a student, right?
Yeah.
And it's all about resilience, and teaching that resilience. We always teach that to our students, but same thing with entrepreneurship is a lot of times it can probably be initially a little discouraging when you fail, but sometimes you learn a lot from that too,
And
right?
that's the beauty of the failure, is that it's not really a failure once you get the right mind frame. It's a learning experience, because you don't know what you don't know until you make the attempt to know it, right? And so I had to come to grips with that, because I've been a pretty, I'd say, confident, cocky nurse up until that point. And to make cold calls, I remember I bought a list from the post office of all the people in my area and their phone numbers, right? And I'm like, I'm about to get all the clients in the world. I called at least 500 people and only got one person to sign up. I got hung up on everything, but it taught me to be more concise with what I was saying to people. And so it was a learning experience.
Which reminds me, tell me, where did you go to nursing school?
Yeah, we didn't mention.
We didn't
that
talk
earlier,
about
right?
this.
Go White.
White.
I love it.
Right here, born and bred in East Lansing, baby.
I love
it.
Not only a nurse, a Spartan nurse.
A Spartan nurse, and I will. Okay.
Yes, yes.
And also, you're involved with the alumni too, right? You're
am.
involved with alumni.
I
we
am.
talked
I'm on the
about that.
alumni
Yeah. So, what can you
committee.
tell me about that?
Well, that is something new for me.
Okay.
That came by surprise. Some very nice person decided that I'd be worthy of that. And so it's just basically getting together with other working nurse professionals. They all have very different occupation. Like one person's a teacher, one person runs a clinic, the other is opening a wine bar. But we're all nurses, and we all get together and talk about university relations. We don't donate money, you know, as we should, you know, to support like endeavors that they have going on in the College of Nursing. And then it's more like a social outlet, because it seems to me like nurses are kind of isolated from each other. We get off into our work, you know, and then we never really connect back with the group. So that's what it is. And it's a 3-year process. So you guys might see me for the next 3 years.
Awesome.
Yes.
So we can hear about your new business.
I hope
how
we want
how it's
updates.
going.
We want
Yeah.
I
updates.
hope so. I hope so. I hope so.
So, who would you like what population would you like to work with, and why? Or who would you like to work with, and why?
I want to work directly with nurses, because I feel that there is something to this burnout that we are having. In my opinion, it's a sustained mental health problem. And I would love to talk to more nurses and hear their stories, see how they're coping with the challenges of, the stresses at work with the short staffing and things like that. I would love to focus my work on nurses, to give back, because nursing has given so much to me.
So have there been any resources that you've identified or, things on social media, anything like that as far as mental health professionals that are specifically focused on nurses that, maybe you saw as like inspiration for that?
Yeah, Johnson & Johnson, surprisingly, does a lot with nurses and their mental health. Another resource that I use, I'm a member of NAMI, that's the National Alliance for Mental Illness, and they have all sorts of resources. There's speakers, brochures, you name it. The American Psychiatric Nurses Association, I'm a member of that as well, and they have a login and chat about different mental health topics through a digital thread. So, yeah, and that inspired me to go onto the Clubhouse app and host, my own rooms based on mental health topics, and that was pretty successful. But those are usually kind of the core group of resources that I stick to because they've been in the fight for mental health for a long time. They can tell you how to combat stigma, some of those old school problems like ECT therapy, Yeah, so I kind of stick with those because they're tried and true,
So tell me about what's been like the hardest part with your mental health journey, or any of like the personal aspects of the professional elements with mental health nursing.
Let's see. Well, my mental health journey has been very personal to a lot of people. You know what I mean? Like I said, it went from being functioning to not functioning. So my family members saw me all just kind of give up on life. And they still haven't gotten over it. You know what I mean? They still remind me, like, I remember when you didn't work, how, And I'm like, it's over,
Let's
I'm
move
okay.
on.
For sure, ready to move on,
Get over it. But it also trickled into my professional life because as I learned more about neuropsychiatry, learned more about behavioral health and how it definitely operates on a right and wrong behavior kind of spectrum, when I took that information into clinical practice, it was kind of overwhelming for some of the people that I practiced with. I remember, and this is funny now, but it wasn't. I was working in a Detroit facility as a charge nurse, and I was using positive self-talk. I had just read a blog that day from NAMI. I'm like, I'm going to talk myself through work. So I'm talking myself through work, right? But my coworker's observing me, and she goes and tells the manager that I'm acting bizarre.
Oh my gosh.
She's like, she's bizarre. Is something wrong with her? She's talking to herself. So they sent me to take a drug test because they thought that maybe I had been on drugs. And like I said, it's funny now.
Yeah, but at the
things
time,
like that are very embarrassing at work,
Right.
And people were looking at me all strange. And then when I came back, I was just like, I don't even want this job anymore.
Oh my gosh.
I was really embarrassed. So it's trickled into my professional life in good ways and bad ways. In good ways, I have a strong internet presence, like very strong internet presence on Facebook. I had almost 10,000 followers on my business webpage. Just recently, I did the Nurse PP channel on YouTube where I was just posting me doing coping skills that nurses could do, and it attracted over like 13,000 people, something like that. So it's affected me like all the way around because I live mentally healthy now, you know. Whereas before I'm like toxic Annie. I can't stand this. I hate this. No self-compassion, right? Now I'm just a soft girl, very into, understanding and empathy and things like that. And so people notice a change in me, like, what happened? And I'm like, blame it on NAMI,
Right. This is me being healthy.
This is me like walking into my healthier self, and it feels good now, but it did not feel good like, going through the professional challenges as well as the personal challenges. Stigma still kind of exists, Nurses are top dollar earners. How dare you take some mental health days off? You better make that money, right? And I'm like, no, I've got depression and my mood is in the toilet. I'm staying home, and that kind of got me a little judgment until you started seeing people, kind of putting the message out there that it was okay to deal with your mental health. I thank God for COVID, to be honest with you, because that made being mentally healthy cool to me. People started realizing like, okay, this is really serious and I'm seriously losing it. And a lot of people just kind of opened up to me. And so professionally, it's been good and bad, kind of bitter and sweet. But now, that I've learned to navigate it and learn how to be a little more convincing, it's a smooth road now. But it was horrible at first.
Yeah. And it's so powerful that you're able to share your lived experience too with those people that are watching your YouTube channels or those kind of things that you're interacting with, because a lot of times those things, somebody maybe needs to see something that maybe resonates with them, and then maybe get that inspiration to maybe take those positive steps or be able to talk about their own mental health. I know some people don't want to talk about their mental health, and that kind of empowers people to be like, okay, it's okay to talk about my mental health. And so I think that that's really powerful that you share your lived experience with those people, and it allows you to create a bigger impact with your audience. So.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's what helps, because what I learned is that most people who are in mental health, like psychiatric nursing, behavioral health nursing, things like that, they have some kind of story where they've been affected by some kind of trauma or something devastating has happened to them that altered their health. And even with nurses, this is why I want to work with them, because the effects of the burnout were unbelievable on us. Our moral compass went out the window, all sorts of things that affect your mental health. Our ability to be compassionate and care for people was cut in half. We had to bundle services and things like that. So that's why I really want to work with nurses, because I think that there is something about my lived experience that they could live through, if that makes sense. Yeah,
absolutely.
And I think everyone, really, every single person has something that they can work on, work through, improve, be more mentally healthy in whatever way. We're all human. We all have something that we can gain by connecting with each other and working on ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
To be better providers for others.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
As nurses, it seems ideal. We have the body of knowledge first before, the patient. We have it first. And so I really want to hone in on nurses, to get that story out, to promote some healing.
One thing we always try to do is we try to, in our curriculum, we try to share some resilience things with our students to try to give them some of those skills. But I think as a professional nurse who's been in it for a while, sometimes they don't get that same level as somebody, talking to them about, all those, coping skills and positive things that they could do, or talking about their feelings. And I think that that's really important, that you kind of keep that going. And, so that way that nurse has that support. I was just thinking back when I was in the ER, a lot of times we'd be exposed to a lot of trauma and things.
Right.
And then, a lot of times, you kind of keep those feelings inside. You wouldn't vent them to anybody.
Yep.
And then eventually over time, those things kind of start to affect you.
Yes, they do.
And so it's important for those nurses to have things. And, nursing has always been, of course, a very trusted profession, very caring profession, way to make a positive impact, but also very stressful.
Very.
And then it was heightened and highlighted, I think, by the pandemic. When we were in the COVID pandemic, it got a lot of media attention, and nurses as heroes and everything else. But nurses have been heroes for a long time.
That's
what I always
wait a minute.
Hey, wait a second. We weren't just heroes because of COVID. We were heroes the whole time, right? But I think that it was heightened and it was highlighted because of that.
Yeah.
And I think it's been an ongoing problem, and it was just exacerbated.
Exactly. That's the key word, exacerbated. Yeah. And so with an exacerbation, there has to be something.
Exactly.
We got to treat it.
You got to treat that exacerbation, right?
You've got to stabilize the person who's got the exacerbated feeling. And it's so important to hear you say that as a male nurse, okay? Because my dad, he was a psych nurse for 20 years. He worked at one of the worst public facilities in the county of Oakland County. But he never shared with me any of his experiences. And I thought that was so weird. I'm like, Dad, what happened? Do you know about Haldol? Did you give some B-52s? What about restraints? Talk to me, And he was just like, no, we're just going to leave the past in the past. But as he saw me kind of like opening up, my dad pulled me to the side. He said, I remember one time this nurse, and he just...
You're like, yes.
Started sharing. You've been waiting to share it.
Yeah, because he wasn't sure if it was okay to share it. And, we play these social roles. You're the doctor. You're the instructor. I'm the nurse. We're on stage, right? But behind all that, we're all humans.
Right.
And I think we're all having a human experience right now where mental health is very, very important. Because it's the mind that leads the body, right? And so if your mind is burnt out at work, you're not motivated, you're having a problem engaging, you're shortcutting, your entire shift, what is the outcome for the patient?
Right.
And so as a nurse, I've been looking at numbers about sicknesses in the United States. And America's more sick than it has ever been in the history of sickness. And so to me, that says, that we as nurses, we got a lot of work to do, but it involves us being the vessel,
right,
the mentally healthy vessel who knows how to draw on the resilience, on the coping skills in order to promote what's best for the people that we serve. You see what I'm saying?
Yes, I love that.
And the patients expect us to be the rock as nurses. They expect us to be the rock. And we can't be that rock for patients. We can't be that consistency and that sense of calm and that, and all those things if we're not taking care of ourselves first.
Absolutely. Because what you pour into the cup comes out of the cup, right? And so we're seeing violence increase against nurses. We're seeing nurses leaving the profession in record number. We're seeing a whole lot of media attention about nurses twerking on patients and, things like that. I saw that on YouTube the other day and almost cried. But, there's a lot of attention being paid to nurses, like you said, out of the exacerbation of the pandemic. But I've always been told when the spotlight's on you, you give your very best. And are we as nurses able to give our very best is my question. And I don't think so. People are very disengaged from their work, very disengaged. And that all starts in the mind. So I think the idea of cold lavender huddles would be my ideal thing for everybody. Make mental health something every day where people can talk about if their boyfriend left them last night or if the kid didn't have the babysitter this morning, because that makes your day. And that makes how you affect people. And I just see it all being just so cyclical, but I really, really, truly want to hone in on nurses and how we can be our best selves, because we've got the knowledge. Sometimes maybe we just need a little refreshing. Like my dad, he just needed a little poke. Yeah.
Absolutely. So thank you again, Pia, for joining us today on the Spartan Nurse Podcast. To find your breaking news and latest updates within the College of Nursing, please refer to our website at nursing.msu.edu. You can also find us on all social media platforms at MICHST Nursing. Who will?
Spartan Nurses will.